31 past the hour, the American Civil Liberties Union has filed a lawsuit against U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement seeking information on how quickly the agency can remove people from the country. The lawsuit comes after President-elect Trump confirmed he plans to declare a national emergency and use military assets to conduct what he says will be the largest mass deportation effort in American history. Two sources familiar with the planning tell NBC News the incoming administration is talking to private prison companies about expanding immigrant detention centers and considering restarting family detention. Incoming Trump border czar Tom Homan says he'll meet with Trump this week, giving us this preview of their plan.
As far as the deportation operation, we will prioritize public safety threats and national security threats because they pose the biggest danger to the United States. We're going to take the handcuffs off ICE. ICE knows who they're looking for. They just haven't been able to go arrest them because Secretary Mayorkas has told them, to tone down the arrest.
With us now is Cecilia Wang, National Legal Director for the ACLU. Cecilia, thank you for being with us. What is this ACLU lawsuit all about?
So thank you, Jose. The lawsuit that we filed yesterday is one in a series of government transparency lawsuits that we filed to try to find out what the capacity of the government is to deport many, many more people than Trump previously did. Trump has said that he's going to execute the largest domestic deportation operation in U.S. history, no expense spared. So make no mistake about what that means. This will be different in both quantity and kind from the first time around. In order to deport the numbers of people that Tom Homan and Steve Miller and Donald Trump are threatening to deport, he has said that he's going to declare a national emergency, deploy the National Guard and the U.S. military against civilians, have federal law enforcement agencies drop what they're doing and go to do immigration enforcement, and commandeer local police. So yesterday's lawsuit is aimed at finding out and shedding light on one aspect of what Trump needs to do in order to deport 1 million people a year. And that is exploit a network of privately run companies who do transportation of immigrants in order to make the deportation system run.
Cecilia, how do you prepare to fight something that has yet to be implemented?
Well, this is exactly how we do it. The first step to fight something that President Trump is going to do once he takes office, probably on day one, is to find out what the government infrastructure is. As I said, this is the third in a series of lawsuits that we have under the Freedom of Information Act to try to find out what is the government infrastructure capacity right now, and what are the ways in which Donald Trump is going to exploit that capacity and exceed its bounds in ways that are going to violate fundamental civil rights. We saw during his first presidency that in the deportation infrastructure, he had privately run airline companies deporting immigrants shackled for 48 hours at a time. The government of Colombia refused to take people back because they found out that these privately run companies were shackling women and children on deportation flights. That's what this lawsuit is aimed at, and the two others we have filed in order to try to find out what the U.S. detention capacity is currently and what the deportation capacity is currently. Step one, find out what Donald Trump is going to do. Step two, predict where he's going to be violating the U.S. laws and people's fundamental civil rights in order to ram 1 million people a year through the deportation system. One other thing I want to
and Cecilia,
mention.
Please do. Please do.
I just wanted to mention one other thing. You just played a clip of Tom Homan saying that they're going to prioritize so-called criminals and national security threats. Well, we have seen what actually happens when the Trump administration claims to be going after so-called criminals. Make no mistake, Tom Homan and Donald Trump believe that all undocumented immigrants are criminals, and we will see home-to-home raids by immigration agents and other law enforcement agents and mass worksite raids. Donald Trump has said he will spare no expense and will be there to meet him at every step of the way where he's violating people's civil rights in the name of immigration enforcement.
And Cecilia, I'm just thinking very quickly on, if the president-elect's plan is 1 million deportations a year, that certainly outweighs and is, more than twice the amount that President Obama deported during his 8 years of the administration. About 3 million people were deported under the Obama administration, about 400,000 plus a year. That structure and infrastructure that was created back then for 400,000, is that still the one that is the basis of the 2024 system?
That's right, Jose. And that's why the fundamental problem with Donald Trump's announcement that he's going to run the largest domestic deportation operation in U.S. history, we know that that is going to violate people's fundamental civil rights. We also know he's not only going after undocumented immigrants who are in U.S. communities. In order to deport that number of people, he's going to have to run tent encampments. We saw that happen on a smaller scale in Texas during his first presidency, and the result was journalists documenting that children were suffering from malnutrition and hunger in these U.S. government-run tent encampments. People were subjected to sexual abuse. There were COVID-19 outbreaks. This is the kind of thing that Donald Trump is going to have to do in order to ramp up deportation capacity in this drastic way, many times over what the current capacity is.
Cecilia, I want to thank you very much for being with us. Appreciate it.